Dear participant, in previous modules, we discussed the need for PPP. We went through the institutional framework, the legal framework, the rationale behind the PPP, role of the government, role of the private sector, how partnership will work. We discussed the different models of PPP. We discussed the process and procedure, and in particular, the need to go on a competitive bid. The discussion was very clear that it's always better to go on competitive bid to get the best price and at the same to ensure that you have the best bidder. Now that we have completed all models, it's time to go specific. What does it mean in real life? So what we'd like to do in this model 6 is to give you a specific case study that we have witnessed around the world on PPP. We will discuss different models. Of course, we'll pick up a few of them. We cannot discuss each model that you have learned from the previous model, but we will be discussing specific BOT or lease contract, and we'll give you in particular the lesson learned from those case studies. So the first one is about a very interesting project in Germany. It's a municipal wastewater project in one of the states, and it's a lease contract model. To remind you, a lease contract model is where the public sector say to the private sector, I would like you to come, operate, maintain my network, but I will also provide you the capital investment needed so that you can expand or ensure that the system is functioning. In other words, the investment will come from the public sector, the operation maintenance come from the private sector, together with the know-how. In this case, we had the private consortium of company with the municipal water manager in the city of Schwarte in the north of state of Germany. They wanted to have an investment of around 65.5 million euro to be implemented. However, there was a budget deficit and they couldn't on their own put it. So they decided to go with joint venture between the players where the state remained as 52% share belonging to the city. And they went for a contract of 15 years. It's a joint venture. It's not an SPV as we discussed earlier. It's a joint venture because here we've seen that 52% of the share belong to the city. All infrastructure remained municipal ownership as we discussed in this model. The asset will remain your property of the public. The structure of this case is the contract was signed between the private company and municipality. You had also an international company which came as an operator, which also was involved in the private company that was created. And here the relation between the customer and the private company is direct, where basically the private company operates the system together with the international water company providing the advice, and at the same time do the operation, maintenance, bill the customer, and get paid. So the private company become, if you want, the custodially responsible on behalf of the municipality and become the interface with the customer. This is a model that is applicable almost everywhere in France, in all the water cities, in the municipalities, where you have a lot of lease contract of this kind. Almost every municipality in France, you have a lease contract in this kind, whatever for water or wastewater. And usually they have a typical contract prepared in advance that's given to each municipality, and it's easier to bid it and really to go through the same measures, the same target of operation. For instance, you can say in this contract, I would like you to reduce the water losses, what we call the unaccounted for water, from, let's say, 30% to 10% in the next 5 years. I would like you to increase the use of water from X% to that. So this is the kind of efficiency improvement that you include. Of course, you can say also, I would like you to reduce the electricity bill from a certain number to another number as a target through efficiency improvement and use an alternative source of energy. The outcome of this project are interesting. it was realized faster than better than initially planned. And this is what I have seen in my personal experience. At the beginning, we are not sure if this will be attractive, if the customer will be used to it, if the relation between the three parties is functioning. But most of the time, in my personal experience, I have noticed that the benefit expected could come quicker than we thought. Why? Because the private sector sometimes come with already good solution hand that they simply have to apply. They come with specific software for operation maintenance. They come with specific technique, manual of operation, and they are much more efficient. Here, tariff did not rise more than the average tariff in the rest of the state, despite substantial investment that were done. No new additional structure has to be established because here the private operator and the new employer simply created a joint stock company or joint company. So what is the lesson learned? Public-private capital and knowledge transfer will help from experience and committee partner can definitely help improve the environment and do a better job in terms of quality and facility. Existing structure can be used to integrate public and private parties, provided that there is sufficient flexibility. However, let me be very clear. When I say existing structure can be used, there is a prerequisite to that. The legal enabling environment is properly done. In the case of Germany, it was, especially after the unification of Germany, all the enabling environment, legal environment for public-private partnership and for privatization at that time was completely revised. So here the legal enabling environment will help you to use existing structure. But in some countries, you don't have this kind of structure, therefore you have to create it to ensure then that the contract could function properly. An extensive MOU created the preliminary stage of private negotiation after tendering. It helped create the framework for each party's responsibility. MOU is an interesting idea, but when you sign an MOU, you need to go from the MOU to the tendering in a very fast way. You don't want just to stick to an MOU. I know many countries, they simply sign MOU and they remain at the project level. Here in this case, it seems it has working very well, but what helped us, it was to maintain the flexibility to allow for negotiation and adaptation. This was a 15 years contract. It was not 25 years contract. Let me remind you, lease contracts are between 8 and 15 years time frame. Let me go now to another model, the DBO model in the case of Dublin Region Wastewater Scheme. Here you have an international consortium of private company and the Dublin municipality. And the reason of this PPP, the rationale, was to enhance the quality and efficiency of the service to the public by arranging the best technology and expertise available on the market, and to increase economic and environmental efficiency. The PPP in this case was represented by the wastewater treatment plant itself, operated as a DBO project. The private contractor was paid for the operation of the plant by the government, while the government collected tariff and non-domestic user. The DBO was signed in 1995. Construction lasted until 2003. And since it was a DPO kind of concession, it was for 25 years. The project funding was from the EU Cohesion Fund, which is usually used for this kind of infrastructure project, the Department of Environment, Heritage and Local Government, the City Council of the Dublin, and non-domestic users, since domestic users do not pay for water treatment in Ireland. This will talk about large industries, industrial complex, etc., etc. The structure of this is very simple. You have a contract between the city and the international consortium, and this is what we call the DBO contract. You had 50% of the fund come from the cohesion funds directly to the city, and from there it is then on land probably to the international consortium. And the international consortium which operate, function, will build the non-domestic customer and will get revenue paid back, so that also some of the loans that was taken from the banks will be paid. So this is a very simple scheme which will allow to bring efficiency, especially to raise funds from outside Ireland. The private operator had the legal obligation of maintaining the treatment plan and covering operation and maintenance. The consortium has also an incentive to increase efficiency by reducing operating costs and increasing profit. The conclusion from this case is that the city used the private consortium for the project to take advantage of the most developed technology the market had to offer, given the limited space available on site and also the fund available. The DBO method ensured best value over the whole life of the project to the government, and it aimed to protect capital investment, ensure sustainability of the project, and the operator has a direct incentive to maintain asset and enhance operational efficiency, because this will have a direct impact on the revenues as well on the profit. Now let's go to another completely different model. Here we talk about the toll road, the Vieira Litoral Alda Shadow in Portugal, where we had a consortium of private company with the Portuguese state. The reason for PPP was to have a rapid program for road construction, which was required, and the budget couldn't finance it. It needed a project structured, which requires smallest possible initial fund from the government, seed money, but since the budget couldn't afford to finance this project, we had to think much more outside the box and look at different models. So the main objective was to enhance availability of road infrastructure, to compensate for regional economic imbalances, and generate employment opportunities. So basically, we have a situation like we've seen it many times in Canada, by the way, where you have some area underdeveloped, equal right, and give them the right to have the same services, but the budget cannot afford to do it. So what they have done here, they look at the concession model, which was incorporated where a PPP project was created as a special purpose vehicle. And you recall we discussed this in previous model, whose shareholder comprised several Portuguese contractor and financial institution with commercial interest in the project. The government of Portugal solicited bids in 1998 from the private sector. And in 2001, the private consortium was awarded the contract. The duration of the concession was for 30 years, including a 5 years construction period. Now you wonder, it took 3 years to bid this between 1998 and 2001. I am not surprised. Those kind of projects are very difficult. It's not because of the design of those projects. It's to raise funding for these projects. And it could take some time. And if I recall, at that time, Portugal also was in financial crisis at a certain time, so they have to wait a bit. The commercial bank loan was for 25 years maturity period, structured as non-recourse loan, repayment of which depend entirely on the SPV revenue performance and cash flow generated. The European Investment Bank gave a loan of 27 years maturity period, guaranteed by a commercial bank syndicate. And the equity from the SPV was provided by shareholder, parent company, and several Portuguese contractor and financial institutions who were stakeholders in the project. This is a bit more complicated than the structure we've seen before. You have the Ministry of Public Work and Finance, which decided to create that consortium. You have the selection through tendering procedure by the Vieira Litoral Alta. You had, on the other hand, the EIB and the commercial bank giving loan and debt. And you have the highway per se, construction operation, highway IP5. And the payment, of course, since it's a toll road, is by the user. So the user will pay the toll road, it will go to the highway, it go back to the consortium, some of the debt will be refinanced, etc., etc. I do not think that the ministry make money on this kind of project, but ensure that the service is provided. And it's not subsidized scheme. It is simply cost recovery scheme. So here, the estimated construction was around 700 million euro. The startup cost was around 75 million, and the financing cost was around 164 million. The environmental appraisal in 2002 resulted in the refusal of the project. Usually, this kind of project, if you don't do the environmental assessment early on and the social assessment, they will be either refused or rejected. Why? Because you are going to a toll road that could go in a forest, it could go in an area which is populated, etc., etc. So you have to look at the environmental assessment and the social assessment upfront during the pre-appraisal period. You do not wait for a long time. At the time this project was heard about it, only around 1/5 was completed. But as of 2019, the highway has now 172 kilometers long. So it was a long process, but they were able to do it. So in addition to go with innovative funding from EIB and other commercial banks, it was also a process on which you have to raise money as you go. That's what I would see here. But at the same time, since it was a highway, you can open the highway, start operating part of it, since it's all road, and as you move, you add to payment for additional kilometers that you will add. So the conclusion is that the absence of environmental assessment created large delay in the PPP, which probably had also an impact, of course, of cost overrun. There was no clear statement of project objective, which provided an opportunity for substandards. Without a careful initial appraisal of a project and development of the public sector, the tender was not justifying the price they have received early on. The Portuguese state learned from this lesson that if to require adequate appraisal of PPP proposal and their long-term impact on public account, it required a creation of PPP unit with responsibility of PPP evaluation appraisal. What does it mean? Portugal didn't have a lot of experience in PPP. They had the budget problem. They decided to go by going on a project approach, not a comprehensive approach. They didn't have the experience, so they were rushing. They did the bidding, but they haven't done a proper appraisal, neither economic nor financial or environmental assessment. One of the biggest lesson here is you need to have your appraisal properly done before you go and launch the bid. Second, you need to have people that have the expertise to evaluate, benchmark, and appraise the bids. That's also one of the lessons learned from previous models, where we said it's very important to have a dedicated team that understand the finance, understand the economics, the environmental issue, to be able to look and appraise the project in a comprehensive and a specific way at the same time. Let's give you another example of the motorway DBOT model in Hungary. Here, the Bureau for the Concession Motorway, established by the Ministry of Transport and the private sector company, comprised of international contractor and a toll road operator. What they wanted is the state that level did not permit public funding, like in the previous case. Also, PPP approach was considered necessary for realization of non-recourse financing for around 60 kilometers. It was just that PPP allowed for a more rapid implementation of the project than would have been possible with a regular public sector procurement and financing. At that time, Hungary didn't have enough money. They were going out of the collapse of the former Soviet Union. I recall that period, since I worked myself in these countries. So they didn't have enough money. The budget was almost dry. They need to raise, they want to show people, citizens, some example that things could happen quickly, and therefore they decided to go with the PPP model. So the project consisted of design, finance, build, operate, and transfer structure. The full traffic risk was transferred to the private sector and mitigated. In other words, the public sector say, I want you to design, I want you to finance, I want you to build, I want you to operate, I want you also to get the revenue generated, and then after X years, I want you to transfer it back to me. In contrast to other motorway schemes in the country, there was no state support other than the initial phase of the project site acquisition, which is pretty important when you talk about highway. If you talk about the assets, where you're going to have to go. The contract was executed in 1993, and it was a 35 period, including a 2 years construction period. You will ask yourself, why the previous case we had 25 years? In this case, I have 35 years. The answer is very simple. When you have such kind of toll road, you look at affordability. How much the citizen can pay as toll to take that highway. And if it's very high, you will go in short period of time. If you extend it to 35 years, it will reduce the amount you as citizen will have to pay, and it will also give a flexibility for the operator a longer period of time to get profit as you go. So it's good for the company, it's also good for the citizen and at their affordability. The private party provided 20% of the total financing in form of equity and shareholder fund. They mobilized around 11 commercial banks, and the EBRD was involved with $329 million loan with a 14 years maturity. The joint financing amounted to around 12 million SUF, was arranged and provided by the EBRD, the Hungarian Commercial Bank, and the insurance company. The structure is a bit similar to what we've seen with the other case. We have the private company, we have the Ministry of Transport that give the concession, you have the EBRD that give the loan, you have the international contractor that are responsible of constructing it. Then you have the private company will invest in kind equity in the highway called M1, M15, and then the user will pay to have access to this toll road, and the revenue will go back to motorway and then go back to the private company. The traffic volume for the first year of commercial question were around only 46% of original estimate. And the revenue was about 50% lower than the forecasted value. I have seen this kind of situation in other places in the toll road where the estimation are usually over what you can expect. A court ruling against relatively high tolls, although this was 35 years and the toll rate should have been lower, but still high. Keep in mind, we're talking about 1993, the collapse of the Soviet Union, destruction of Eastern Europe. This country was coming out of a system where it was very poor. They couldn't afford even to pay for this kind of concession. So the project was eventually taken over by a special purpose sector company. So it failed as a toll road because people couldn't pay. It was not used properly. So therefore, the public sector decided to step over and take it back and as a public sector company and probably continue to operate it, but under a subsidy scheme. The lesson learned is, again, appraisal, economic analysis, affordability analysis, project finance analysis are crucial as we design a project. And they have to be done at the pre-appraisal phase, not during the project negotiation or when you are doing financial closure. So the viability of PPP was undermined by underlying economics that we said here. Traffic forecasts are widely recognized as difficult to get it right. And as we said, this kind of project always have this kind of issues. There was a lot of optimism in traffic forecast, exasperated by adoption of tender criteria. Here, probably, this highway was 50 kilometers. One of the assumption was probably it will have a regional impact and it will have a cargo traffic, trucks that will come from neighbor country, neighbor sub-region, and will use it. It was not what happened. The project has established itself as a benchmark of danger of which project participants are exposed when traffic risks are high. And a defaulting private concession can lead to taking over by the public sector. We wanted to give you good case studies. We want to give you also bad case studies, where sometimes the PPP doesn't deliver. It's not because the PPP model is not good. It's because the design, the approach, the rationale was not well prepared. And this shows the cases. In this situation, the public sector has no choice but to take over the asset and operate it themselves. This is what not to do, not necessarily what to do, and that's an important lesson learned for us. Let me now come to the North Fluminense Plant Brazil, what we call in the power sector IPP, Independent Power Producer Model. These are self-standing power generation projects. It's a kind of BOT, but in the power sector, we'll call it IPP. The project was initiated, sponsored by the Brazilian firm, and now sponsored by the Brazilian Electricity Distribution, which is a unit of the French private company, EDF. The project was constructed by a consortium of Brazilian construction company. Brazil has very solid local construction companies. They were in charge of the construction of this site. And the pressure of Brazil increased reliance on hydropower with a long-blooming hydro storage. The government decided to authorize thermal power plant, among other projects, to reduce Brazil's reliance on hydropower power. Basically, Brazil used to have around 60 to 70% of the power generated by hydropower. If you recall, 15 years ago, there was a major power crisis on which we have some city part of these countries with no power. So they decided, this, because there was a major dry season, they decided to diversify the energy strategy and to go beyond the hydropower and to put some other form of generation, including thermal power. So the project design sell its electricity to distributor based in Rio de Janeiro, which is the parent company. The project is self-dealing. This means that the plant and distribution are owned by the same parent company. As a result, the two have a competitive advantage over the firm in the sector. The plant is a 4-unit, 780 megawatt project. The first unit was commissioned in 2003, while the last one was in 2004. The private company is take or pay of 20 years purchase agreement. What does it mean? Here, I am a generator of power. When I bid this contract in IPP, it means I will produce electricity, and you, as public sector, as distribution company, what is a public project, you are obliged to take what I produce. Take or pay. If you don't want to take, or you don't need all the energy generated, you still have to pay. And that's what we call a take or pay 20 years purchase power agreement. And that's an important nuance in this kind of model. And we've seen it all over. We've seen it in Pakistan, we've seen it in Uganda, we've seen it in, of course, in Europe, we've seen it in the United States. Those models are very important because, as you can imagine, a power plant generates power, but if suddenly the transmission network is not able to take all that power, or the distribution is not able to use all that power, and there is a mismatch between generation and distribution, it should not be the fault of the generator. And therefore, generation always request to have a take or pay contract. In other words, guarantee me you're going to take all my power at X cent per kilowatt. The project outcome has a secure taken off and full supplier. So I know that you're going to pay me. Probably it comes sometime with some guarantees. Given the stable gas supply, the plant is reliable. The size of the project was not large enough to impact the retail tariff structure in Rio de Janeiro. As in each of the self-dealing projects, the primary challenge of the project has stemmed from the impact on the tariff. However, an advantage of having the same company for the plant, in this case, and the distributor, is that the project had a stable operating relationship with the off-taker. In other words, the take or pay here was simple, because I produce, you take, you resell, you pay me. Given that the project has a secure fuel source, the plant was a reliable source of electricity. Because once again, what's important with those IPP is how you secure the input. And that's why you have also specific contract for fuel security. While implementing the project of this nature, the size of this project need to be accounted for to see if we would have significant impact on tariff in this sector. We've seen some countries with 2, 3, 4, 5 IPPs competing among themselves. This will put pressure on the tariff to go down if I give a choice to the consumer to buy electricity from that company or that company, as long as the company responsible of transmission and distribution has a good relation with those generators. And this comes to bigger question in the energy sector, a sector that I know personally pretty well since I was involved for many years, is how do you reform the energy sector in general? Most of the energy sector in many countries, we have public sector company. Even in province like Quebec, we still have Hydro-Quebec, which is among the largest, the biggest power generator company in the world. It's part of what I call the E8, because there are 8 countries, and E8 electricity company are the largest. It's still publicly owned. However, in developing countries, in emerging countries, most of these big companies were either privatized or unbundled. And that's an important aspect. In other words, you take this sector, you take the generation apart, and you see, I would like to see competition upfront on the generation part by selling existing asset of public company, plus for expansion, create new generation plan through IPP models that they compete among themselves. They will sell the electricity to a transmission company, then it's distributed. And that's a model that many countries think about it when they do power sector reform. And therefore, one of the main lessons learned is the IPP model is part of a larger sector reform, structural reform of the energy sector and the power sector in particular. That's another project, an IPP also in the Guangdong Sajoi, what we call C project. It was developed by a private conglomerate. It's a joint venture with a minority holding. The Guangdong province is an economic hub, as you know, and while it exports electricity, it's primarily an electricity importer. The basic structure of the deal involved a joint venture project company owning the power generating asset and selling electricity to the provincial grid. As I discussed earlier, you have the transmission company here, you have the private generator. They will sell it to the transmission company, then the transmission company sell it back to the distribution company that sell it to the customer. The financial closed in 1992 and the commercial operation date started in 1996. Again, 20 years contract. In general, in the electricity sector, most of the contracts I've seen are between 20 and 25 years for a simple reason. As a private investor, I look at rate of return on my investment. And usually for the energy sectors or power sectors, I look at 20 to 25% rate of return. The period of 20 to 25 years allow me to get such kind of return. The project outcome here is owing to difficulties, technical. The required minimum offtake was not achieved, so the private company was not receive all the bonuses as planned. The project company suffered at 16.44 in tariff. Apart from indemnification, steady economic growth and increased demand by the province helped ensure to put back this project. However, in the aftermath of foreign company exit, which was forced to get out, the project has been performing well. Generation output of the plant increased, but the indemnification cost shifted much of the risk to the government. So basically here, the private sector reduced the risk it's taking, shifted back to the government. This was one of the few projects in China which has not suffered from systematic issue pertaining to those that we've seen in China, where basically in China, there are so many public sector companies that produce electricity or construct road that it's always difficult, a state-owned enterprise basically, it's difficult for the private sector to penetrate. But his project succeeded because of its location. Guangdong region is a hub. If the provinces were growing at a healthy rate, it's where you have a lot of the export going from there. It's a very, very, very solid area. And it succeeded because there was so much demand for electricity that this province will take any electricity generated by anybody. Another reason for the success may have been the huge involvement by the Chinese partner, which takes 60% of the profit after deduction. So again, here, innovation, public sector, private sector, local private sector, local public sector because of the involvement of the Guangdong area and people, and the city probably in this project. That's a BOT now that we should talk about it. We talk about IPP, let's talk about a BOT model, again in China. It's an international collaboration between private company with the Shandong provincial government. We talk about 3,000 megawatt. As you see, this is 20 years built on transport contract. Why? Because again, with 20, 25 years, I can get my 20, 25% rate of return. It is both greenfield and brownfield component of the project. In other words, I have an existing project that I need to operate, maintain, but also I want to expand, and there is another part which is a greenfield project. It's a deal structure which involved a joint venture company acquiring an existing power plant, this is the brownfield component, and developing 2 additional units, these are the greenfield component. The project was signed in 1987, and construction of the greenfield was completed in 2004. It took a while to do that one. Usually, in my experience, in power project, you should be able to construct it in 2 years. Probably here, the funding was an issue. The project funding was about $2.2 billion, equity and debt, equity 30% from the parties in the project, and the debt's around 70% funded through export credit financing, USD syndicated commercial loan, and renminbi loan. As you noticed here, we talk about equity of 30%. In some countries, it could be 20%, but it's always between 20, 30% equity, and the rest is debt. It's always more difficult to find equity than to raise debt. But in this case, very interesting, people wanted this project so badly that they decided to put 30% equity. The project provided much needed electricity to the province. Again, it was a growing province. It needed this electricity. And keep in mind that there is an important relation between economic growth and infrastructure development and investment in the power sector. And there is a direct link as an economist between infrastructure development, power development, and economic growth. And one of the sector in infrastructure, which is the most important to fuel economic growth, is the power sector. Whatever capacity was created under the project was absorbed by the province demand. Technical problem kept the plant from meeting availability target for the first 3 years of operation, but then it adjusted itself. At the outset, tariff for the greenfield part was lower than from the brownfield unit of the project, which was very interesting. Why? Because technology is giving us much better way of doing business. It's lowered the production cost, and that's why probably it was reflected in the tariff. The project dealt with the problem pertinent to China at that time, usually inability to secure a tariff rate. The project is not generalized to other companies because of the risk profile it has. But overall, it seemed that the fortune of the Shandong project was tied to economic of the electricity power. The profitability rose at the time when demand growth outpaced capacity addition and declined when the opposite occurred. Those that did this kind of project in China made a lot of money. China, for many years, had an economic growth between 6 to 8 to 9%. And as you know, there is a direct link between demand for energy and economic growth. Usually it's 1-to-1. In the case of China, from my own experience, what we have seen, when economic growth was going at 7%, demand for energy was going at 10 to 12%. 10 to 12% demand of energy is reflected on China for the last 10 years, adding 1 gigawatt of power generation every other week. 1 gigawatt. And that's a lot of power generated coming from the public sector, private sector, PPP, and any other model that you can imagine. Now let's move to another model completely different. The Bangkok SkyTrain Thailand, which is a BOT model. This is the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration and the private company decided to have a curb in order to curb the pollution and traffic congestion in Bangkok, which, as you can imagine, is one of the worst in the world. They decided to create a PPP scheme and to invest $1 billion on kind of Bangkok SkyTrain. The government, of course, didn't have the money. So they decided to go with 30 years BOT contract, build, operate, transfer. The private partner was fully responsible for design, financing, construction, and operation. The revenue stream for the private sector were based solely on fares. You have to pay, and this has to cover investment, operation, and maintenance, and get you profit. We talk about 1.4 billion project funding. We talked about 2-to-1 debt to equity ratio, and that came from the Thai Commercial Bank and Development Bank. And the financing consortium agreed to use loan mainly from commercial bank, and the construction consortium having a share in risk to ensure quality and timely delivery. It was a very simple model. A special purpose company was created. The Bangkok Metropolitan Administration, which is the local government of the city, give the concession contract for 30 years. The financier will sign a financing agreement with the SPV to raise debt and equity. And the shareholder are, as you see here, the project management company, 69%, international infrastructure company, around 8.7%, and the Thai company, the rest. And these are the shareholders of the SPV. Then you have, of course, the EPC contractor, the one who was supposed to contract it. The relation is direct between the SPV and the user. Ticket. You want to take the train, you buy a ticket, full cost recovery, and then the money will go to the SPV. The forecast predicted 600,000 riders a day, but initially there was only 150,000. This is always like that on those countries. It's like a toll road. We always overestimate how much we can imagine people will take that new facility. But when people start paying, they realize that maybe the affordability was not analyzed properly. This resulted in nearly collapse of the private company, which had to file for business rehabilitation at a certain time. The private companies were released from rehabilitation and started making profit, resulting in a different relationship. The key takeaway from this case is to highlight the difficulty of transferring demand risk from one party to another party in the context of an accurate forecast. If you don't have good economic studies done and good forecast, it could cost you a lot of money. The near failure of the project shows an external internal factor which could significantly affect development of large investment in that kind of format. However, the internal factor includes issues such as inaccurate ridership forecast, while external factors including the depreciation of the money in 1997 to the speculative attack at that time. So there was issue of risk, but if you look at this project right now, and I took the Bangkok train a few times, it's now part of the infrastructure of the city. It was able to help reducing pollution, to help to reduce congestion, and this company now put a tariff which is affordable, because I've seen many times this SkyTrain full. So this project of many years, the first 5 to 10 years will be difficult, but in my opinion, if you look in the long run, those projects are good projects and they could give good profit for the private sector. We went through all the discussion. We give you example of lease contract. We give you example of BOT contract. We give you example of IPP contract. We give you example of the design, build, operate contract. There are many, many examples. What we have now is useful links and resource book on case studies, which give you a lot of examples from Europe, United States, developing countries, as well as from the region in Asia. So I do hope that those case studies will help you think about what's best for the country, what kind of best model you can use as you develop this model, this idea, and what is most important thing, what are you delivering to the people? When we do think about PPP is not about profit to the private sector only. It's also delivering the best service at the lowest cost to the citizen.